These little grains, they might look unexceptional, but they have been some of the most precious substances in the world. Their value has declined significantly over the last 2,000 years, since 3 wise men travelled from the east to Bethlehem to present these resins, frankincense and myrrh, along with gold, to the new Messiah, the newborn Jesus in his manger. The value of gold is currently much higher than it's ever been in history. If you can believe it, at the time of Jesus' birth, frankincense and myrrh resin were worth as much or more than the gold. The Nativity, the story of Jesus' birth, is how many of us in the West have come to learn of frankincense and myrrh. Children reenact the story at Christmas time in churches and primary schools, but most of us have never actually used these resins as they no longer hold much relevance in our modern secular society. There are some people who still use these precious substances, however. Perfumers, aromatherapists and cosmetics makers will all be familiar with frankincense and myrrh essential oils, which are prized for their rich and balmy fragrances and therapeutic benefits. Frankincense is still burned in some Catholic churches, but less and less these days as we are increasingly a smokeless society. Practitioners of modern witchcraft value their ritual and healing properties, but for nearly everyone else, these ancient resins would no longer even be recognised. But this wasn't the case in the ancient world, where smoke, fire and aromatics were very much part of daily life. And aromatic smoke touched every echelon of society, from the health and hygiene practices of the peasant farmer right up to the sanctification of holy temples and ceremonies of kings and queens. Let's start by setting fire to some of these precious resins, just to get an idea of what they're like when they're burning. You just place a few of the grains of frankincense on top of the lit charcoal disc, and as you can see now, it's really starting to bubble up and smoke. Wow, it's really fresh, clean, lemony, and well, to me it smells very much like a church. We'll just add a few grains of myrrh to the frankincense. Myrrh is much more resiny, it's more of a base note. So this is frankincense and myrrh in action. The frankincense comes from the dried sap of boswellia trees and the myrrh comes from the commiphora tree. These trees only grow in the tropical regions of Arabia, Africa and India, which made them fairly scarce and therefore highly valuable and expensive in the ancient world. In fact, one could argue that the ancient world from Rome to the Far East was held up by the trade routes and fueled by the import and the export of frankincense and myrrh, along with other precious spices such as cinnamon, sandalwood, oudwood, turmeric and the like. The ancient Egyptians and the Babylonians, they also burned frankincense and myrrh in their spiritual ceremonies and rituals, and the Egyptians especially likened frankincense to the sun and to life and to light and the day, and myrrh corresponded with the evening time, the night time, the underworld, with the chthonic realm. So this one is copal, this is copal. So it's a resin which is very similar to frankincense. It comes from the same family of the tree known for its aromatic incense resin. It's sacred to the religions of Mesoamerica, the Aztecs and the Mayan, and like frankincense and myrrh, copal's botanical and ecological story is very deeply interwoven with the long history of the people who have valued these aromatic resins for thousands of years, using them for healing, for incense, in religious ceremony, to the extent that they have become very much part of their cultural identity. So the copal is usually burned on its own, unlike frankincense and myrrh in the Aztec ceremonies. It seems to melt down a lot faster than frankincense and myrrh. It's furious and it's bubbling. It smells a lot lighter. So this is sandalwood powder. It's another precious aromatic with a really divine, beautiful powdery scent. It's used as an incense and cosmetic. Sandalwood is sacred in Hinduism and Buddhism and also other cultures and religions of Asia. Sandalwood is often mixed with spices such as cinnamon and clove to make really beautiful, fragrant incense cones like this one here. Wow, that's such a spiritual smell. Another spiritual incense resin you might be familiar with is dragon's blood. So this is widely used in occult magic and spirituality. As you can see, it's this really striking colour of red, like a nice Martian blood red, hence the name dragon's blood. It has a very spiritual, mystical scent, perhaps one that we associate with those lovely New Age incense shops that are on the high streets. The dragon's blood resin, this comes from the Dracana cinnabari tree. So this grows only in Yemen, and this tree is very precious to the people of that country and that region. It's been prized for thousands of years for its medicinal properties. It's been used in various different ways, also as a dye and as a cosmetic, as well as being burned as an incense for its beautiful fragrance. The impact of incenses and aromatics in the ancient world is an incredible story that is not commonly known. These aromatics are natural substances which are impossible to synthesize in a lab, and they come from plants which aren't easy to cultivate outside of their native lands, where the climate and ecology is just right for them. Our modern world is awash with products and brands to the extent that we've lost our knowledge and connection to these precious substances, which have played such an important and, dare I say, even central role in the creation of human civilization. Their evolutionary stories as species are very much entwined with our own, but have now receded into obscurity. We tend to think of incenses these days in terms of a nice fragrance or to set a spiritual or relaxing mood, but the impact of aromata on the ancient world far extends incense as we understand it today. The ancients burned incense with much more purpose and intention, as they were considered sacred secretions of the gods. Understanding the true power and purpose of aromatics really requires us to try to see the world through the perspective of ancient people, to whom these things that were precious, rare and healing were direct manifestations of the divine. Should a plant heal a festering wound, this plant was magical, as healing was magical transformation or a divine process akin to a miracle. But it wasn't just belief that fueled the demand and the use of aromatics. A much deeper biological process was unfolding, which might be explained as a symbiotic relationship between species. As modern humans, we've become so used to observing the plant and animal kingdoms as if we are separate, because that's how we view ourselves in relation to the world. It's very difficult to see our own instincts at work in nature for creating relationships with plants and other species in order to ensure our own survival in the way that we see other species doing so. This seems to be the case with aromatic plants and the plant and human relationship, which attract us with their divine aromas and their delicious and beautiful fragrances and flavors. Symbiotic doesn't always mean mutually supportive. Quite often, this word is used in that way by ecologists to highlight cooperation in nature. Symbiotic can also tip over to the parasitic, when one species exploits the other to extinction. Now, this isn't quite yet the case with aromatics, as we do plant and pollinate and make efforts to cultivate the species that we value as resources, as well as harvesting and extracting from them. There was a time when aromata were as important as antibiotic medicines. So before antibacterial hand soaps and antiseptic creams and medicines, the smoke of tree resins and also aromatic herbs such as thyme, sage and rosemary provided the best protection from microbial pathogens. Fumigation was practiced on a daily basis in the ancient world. Aromatic resins, herbs, woods such as sandalwood, cedar and spices like cinnamon bark were used to create incense, which was cleansing and could rid the atmosphere of foul odours. It wasn't just the air that was being cleansed, but also the body was smoke cleansed daily, as was hair and household objects such as drinking cups and bowls and vessels. Fumigation or smoke cleansing was an integral hygiene practice. Now, I think the ancient history of incense really highlights an innate knowledge, or what we might call an instinct, about microbes and pathogens in the air, and also how to reduce the spread of these nasties before we knew about the microbial world, such as germs, bacteria and viruses, or the molecular world of plant chemistry. If you were to travel back in time to ancient Babylon, for example, you might find aromatic resin burning from clay censers in every building and house, perhaps in town squares and places of worship, marketplaces, public buildings and royal palaces, in all those busy environments where people are gathered together. We now know that these aromatics are nature's antibacterial agents, and burning them in these spaces would have been really helpful in creating an antimicrobial atmosphere that supported the immune system and also kept down the growth and the spread of pathogens, particularly types of bacteria, and thus inadvertently supporting the flourishing of the human populations within them. In fact, burning myrrh and frankincense has been shown to reduce airborne bacterial counts by 68%. Burning aromatics was commonplace in the ancient world, but it has altogether declined in the modern day. It's true that modern antiseptics and disinfectants such as clinical phenol or carbolic washes used in surgery and medicine are much more reliable for killing germs. But what is important is that for thousands of years we were instinctively selecting and burning the correct natural substances that were helping us to survive in an ongoing and deadly war against the microbial world of pathogens. And this was happening without direct knowledge of microbial or plant science. And it's quite amazing that we have always known intuitively that resins such as frankincense and myrrh are healing, preservative and very potent, and for this we called them divine secretions, and we burned them as offerings to the gods. We now know why they worked, which is that they are composed of powerful chemicals which are analgesic, antibacterial, relaxing, anti-inflammatory and protect the body from a range of bacterial pathogens. This instinct for tapping natural resources to sustain and adapt to ecological and environment stresses isn't so incredible when it's observed in many instances within nature. For example, wild chimpanzees use medicines just like we do. They carefully select and chew the fresh leaves, which are bitter and medicinal, to heal their wounds and to rid themselves of parasites. Other interesting examples are monarch butterflies and milkweed, honeybees and propolis. Now, propolis is a compound made of tree resins which creates a sticky antimicrobial paste which the bees use to seal their hives and to protect themselves against pathogens. And nature is just full of these symbiotic relationships going on between organisms which just seem to find each other and develop codependent relationships. So without milkweed, there will be no monarch butterflies. We burned antibiotic resins in places where people come together, such as temples and places of worship, palaces and homes, protecting ourselves against pathogens. The aromatics that attract us to these substances are actually the volatile compounds produced by the plant. So the plant produces essential oils when they are grazed by insects. This is actually a form of communication whereby the plant sends signals to other plants to let them know that predators are near. Some volatile compounds even attract the predators of the insect pests. So it's all really intelligent and it's infinitely fascinating. Ancient healers knew that incense, frankincense and myrrh, along with other aromatics such as cinnamon and spices, cassia, cardamom, cloves, camphor, bay and thyme, and so many other aromatics, had powerful healing properties, and they used them medicinally and often correctly. The Egyptians and Mesopotamians especially had an incense for every ailment, such as a fever, an abscess, a childbirth problem, stomach complaints, and incense seemed to have been an integral healing method, along with applying ointment and administering pills and carrying out surgical procedures and the like. I often like to talk about how very little distinction was made between physical health and spiritual health in the ancient world. And I think perhaps the best way to understand this is that sickness, without the aid of microscopes and petri dishes, scans and x-rays, is an invisible force causing visible effects. And in the ancient world, invisible forces belonged to the spirit realm, which operated by mysterious laws, its own mysterious laws, and it's only natural, indeed rational, that our ancestors should have feared forces which were beyond their control that can harm or kill them. So this is a natural instinct for survival, which is giving rise to a belief in the supernatural. In this way, it makes perfect sense that a sickness is a negative manifestation of a spiritual problem. An epidemic of plague or a bout of boils or cankers is the spirit world just making itself known in the physical world. This might be treated as an imbalance or a displeasure of the spirits, gods and ghosts. Maladies and misfortunes were often seen to be caused by evil spirits or sorcery or a punishment by the gods. So to restore health, one had to connect with the heavens and the spirit realm, either by banishing and casting out evil or by making offerings to appease spirits and make good with them, or a bit of both, just to be on the safe side. So the aromatic gums and resins burned as incense served a dual function. On the one hand, healing the body on the material realm, and on the other, taming the spirits in the invisible spirit realm. Aromatics weren't only burned medicinally, but they were used to make ointments, oils, infusions, poultices, and pills. Kyphi is an ancient Egyptian incense that was burned in temples to the gods, but was also taken medicinally for throat infections and other complaints such as stomach problems and rheumatism. Kyphi was made by soaking raisins in wine and making a sticky pulp, and then blending this with aromatics such as frankincense and myrrh, rose petals, cinnamon, cardamom, and other powdered medicinal and aromatic herbs, often using honey as a binder, which of course is another antibacterial agent. There are around a dozen known recipes for Kyphi, which is preserved in ancient herbals and temple inscriptions and in Greco-Roman medical texts. So these recipes span different historical periods and cultures, and while they share a core of similar ingredients and ritual significance, their compositions vary slightly from region and place. In the Egyptian temple of Edfu on the west bank of the Nile, for example, a Kyphi recipe is described as having 16 ingredients, some of which are mastic, pine resin, sweet flag, camel grass, mint, cinnamon, cypress, juniper berries, pine kernels, raisins, sweet wine, honey, frankincense and myrrh. And this is all to be ground up, blended and boiled and processed into small incense balls. The Greek philosopher Plutarch describes how the Egyptians offered incense to the sun with frankincense resin offered at sunrise, myrrh at midday, and Kyphi at sunset. Kyphi is made of all edible stuff, with frankincense and myrrh being the two central ingredients. In the Egyptian temples, Kyphi was offered to the gods in these special censers, which are literally extended arms with hands holding a bowl with the incense burning in it. I've been making Kyphi, which differs from other incense blends that I make because it blends wet and dry ingredients and has a moist resinous texture with a sweet and layered scent when burned. I was very surprised that it smells like Christmas pudding, or at least my version did. And I think it's interesting that if we travel back to ancient Egypt 2,000 years or more, then the temples could possibly smell Christmassy. Of course, this is a long time before Christmas pudding was invented with all the fruit and the spices, which of course those spices come from Arabia. So the Christmas pudding was invented in the 14th century, and by that time we already had like the cinnamon and cloves available to us. Today we see mostly frankincense and myrrh as church incense, and it wouldn't occur to us to eat it. It's less known that these resins are edible and well tolerated when taken medicinally. They are shown to have various medicinal compounds which make them very effective against certain illnesses. In the Middle East, where frankincense is produced, the resin is chewed like a gum, much like we chew airwaves or Wrigley's gum. And it's said to be really good for your teeth and your gums because it kills the bacteria and protects against gum disease. Myrrh tincture makes an excellent mouthwash too. So it was used by the Egyptians to embalm mummies, i.e. to preserve tissue from decay, which we now know is because it's very powerfully antibacterial. It's also a very good oil to add to cosmetics for the skin. Science is now discovering just how powerful myrrh really is. It has several strong effects against drug-resistant bacteria and is proving especially effective against Lyme disease bacteria in labs. It's an amazing wound healer and effective against skin infections, including against infections such as ringworm, athlete's foot, and other fungal infections. It's a natural anti-inflammatory and pain reliever. It kills parasites, mild cancer cells, and so on. Frankincense and myrrh are literally among our strongest allies, and you can begin to see why these were once more valuable than gold and why they were considered divine secretions by the pharaohs and the kings and the emperor. You only need to imagine how potent these resins are when combined with other medicinal aromatics, as with Kyphi, which was for thousands of years considered the best food for the gods as well as a medicinal remedy for many ailments. The word frankincense means the best incense, and as such, not everyone could afford this aromatic. Frankincense and myrrh were luxury commodities that were highly valued not only for their religious and medicinal properties, but for their rarity and their symbolic power. If you lived in the West, like Rome or Greece or anywhere else in Europe, you would have had to have procured these aromatic resins and other spices from the Arabian spice merchants who travelled the ancient trade routes from Africa, India and Arabia to the Mediterranean as far as China and East Asia. Now, the further away from the places of origin, the more expensive your aromatics and spices become. In Rome, frankincense was used only by the most wealthy. In ancient Rome, a soldier was paid 225 denarii, which are silver coins. Now, a pound of myrrh cost 16.5 denarii, which would have been almost a month's wages for the soldier. Frankincense has always been a bit more affordable than myrrh, but it's still elite. Myrrh was as expensive as gold and lapis lazuli, definitely. And of course, the rarer a substance is, the more expensive and the more sacred it is, and this was true in ancient Egypt as well. A great story in Egyptian history is Queen Hatshepsut's expedition to the land of Punt. Almost 3,500 years ago, they went with the goal of opening a trade route to acquire mainly myrrh, but also gold, ebony, and other spices. The land of Punt is now believed to have been the Horn of Africa. They famously returned with live myrrh trees in baskets, which were planted on Egyptian soil and where they were successfully cultivated throughout the rest of her reign. The myrrh trees and their resin was cultivated and used as an offering to Amun, the god. There was clearly a connection between these once rare and luxurious substances and the gods and royalty, linking them, and that was, of course, the belief in their divinity. The resin, the precious substance, was the divine link between the mortal rulers and their gods. Frankincense and myrrh, as well as other aromatics such as the balm of Gilead, played an important role in creating rulers and hierarchy and sanctifying these ruling elites and bringing them into a kind of a divine covenant with the gods, or a divine conversation. Of course, if the common people were using aromatic herbs such as bunches of rosemary and thyme and sage to fumigate and as incense, the elites needed something that set them apart from the ordinary person. As I mentioned at the start, most of us in the Western world are familiar with frankincense and myrrh through the story of Jesus' nativity. 3 wise men from the east traveled to Bethlehem in Palestine to present the newborn with gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh. These gifts conferred a symbolic meaning of kinship or royalty, and this visit by the wise mages, who we assume used astrology and astronomy to locate and identify the Son of God, most likely came from Babylon, which is today's Iraq. These items are being offered to the Son of God. They must be the best things on earth, and vice versa. The best things on earth must be heaven sent. Manifestations of the divine, of the gods, should be offered to royalty and the gods. Across ancient India, China, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, Egypt, Greece and Rome, all the great regions of early civilization where writing, bureaucracy and organized religion emerged, sacred incense seems to appear simultaneously as a universal technology, and this magic happens in part because of the incense routes that connected them. So the spice route and the trade that was carried out along it were really important to the growth of these civilizations and their empires. It is fascinating that despite the oceans, the deserts, mountains, the vast distances and the language divides separating these civilizations, that they all discover the value of aromata. They consider them sacred. So aromata are always used for healing and purification, but also for divine sanctification, for creating sacred space and a technique for mortals to communicate with the gods. So sacred incense you can think of quite literally as a telephone wire to the gods, but also fuel for these trade networks. The importing of luxury incense across these great empires also connected up these disparate realms. In the same way, the aromata also connected the elites and the royalty to the gods and made them great. When great empires trade, it's not just goods that pass through the realms, but also symbols, beliefs, entire systems of meaning, even religions, complete with their gods, spirits, and temple rites. So a kind of religious diffusion happens, and we see that between Egypt and Hellenistic Greece and Rome, from India and China with Buddhism, and all across the Northern Hemisphere too, where Germanic, Norse, Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, Frankish all seem to converge at certain times. Therefore, no religion or nation or belief system is like pure and elementary at any point. The Catholic religion was late in taking up frankincense and myrrh, which had already been servicing the ancient world religions and the empires for millennia before the invention of Christianity. And that's quite something. The physical material, the aromatic wood like oud and the stone like lapis lazuli, the incense resin, matters far less than the idea attached to it. These ideas are values, myths, and spiritual meanings carried along ancient trade routes, which shaped civilizations as much as any military conquest or scientific breakthrough. The value and symbolic meaning of frankincense and myrrh that was spread was that it was the stuff of royalty. So it made kings holy and anointed them. When you strip humanity back to its most primitive state, it's a very human thing to believe in gods and spirits and to seek them in the skies above and to burn pleasing herbs and resins and to see the smoke rising and sense a connection with divinity. A Chinese poem expresses this very human instinct for burning aromatics in the ancient belief that mortals eat grains and gods eat incense. And this belief was widespread and it was taken for granted in the ancient world. Now, it wasn't exactly believed like a fact, but it was sensed like a truth. If we had never had this instinct, would we still have built great cities, global trade networks, the internet, or even artificial intelligence? If we hadn't experienced aromatic smoke rising, would we have conjured all these gods to commune with? Would we have cause to believe in them? My intuition is that aromatic incense has been a significant force in the development of modern human civilization, including religion and the gods, medicine, hierarchy and royal dynasties, as much as gold, silver and oil, or science and technology. The way I've come to see it, long before telephones, satellites, or data cables, there was a sacred network comprised of aromatics, smoke, and fire. And this network connected the ancient realms and cultures along a horizontal plane, while along a vertical axis, this network connected the mortal or our physical realm to the invisible realm of spirit. And this was the first technology. The first foray into alchemy might well have been burning natural substances, transforming the state of raw materials so that they can pass through the ether and into the invisible realm of spirit, where this communication, yes, it's a form of communication, is received by another kind of being, unlike us mortals who are made of flesh and bone and blood. So why burn incense today? We know its chemistry, we know the botanical names of all the aromata and the plants and their origins. Incense has become demystified and it's lost its sacred value in the modern world. However, incense is a part of a timeless, magical framework that exists independent of science or religion as a tool which enables us to cultivate a relationship with the divine, and as such it remains a potent technology for building selfhood and for drawing down the virtues of the archetypes, the archetypal gods. By virtue, I don't mean pious delusions about moral superiority. The gods are archetypes. They embody ideals that we must embody in order to survive, adapt, and evolve, both as individuals and as a collective, as civilization. The gods are still operative as long as humanity exists. So the last god, i.e. the last archetypal image of a god, or the last idea of a god, dies with the last human mind. And by this I mean belief is necessary and the invisible realm where the gods and the spirits and the supernatural resides exists as long as we exist, and as long as nature still holds certain secrets and mysteries from us. There will always be battles going on between good and evil, or light and dark, or life and death, however you want to frame it. Now, the ancient people had an instinct for this battle, and so they burned incense to the gods to communicate their needs and desires and hopes for survival, hopefully to receive blessings of prosperity and health and life and children and goods and riches. But it was on another realm, the material plane, they were simultaneously in an unconscious battle against deadly pathogens, which really is a battle of survival for our species, and one which we still face, which just might defeat our species. Science has given us many antibacterial products and drugs which may all prove futile one day. We don't know yet how this battle will play out if antibiotic resistance is really continues to become such a threat. So next time you light an incense stick or a cone, or if you burn some loose incense, frankincense or myrrh, now remember how the purpose of sacred incense has been as a fundamental technology which has helped us to win battles on various dimensions of existence, including those non-existent or mystical realms that we can sense and which are determining outcomes for us, but which we can't yet observe or know directly. Be that a mystical or a supernatural spiritual realm, or the realm that science has just not been able to discover and describe yet.